4. Crossing the boundaries of affection. "What's happening to us, Gorda?" I asked after the others had gone home. "Our bodies are remembering, but I just can't figure out what," she said. "Do you believe the memories of Lydia, Nestor, and Benigno?" "Sure. They're very serious people. They don't just say things like that for the hell of it. But what they say is impossible. You believe me, don't you, Gorda?" "I believe that you don't remember, but then..." She did not finish. She came to my side and began to whisper in my ear. She said that there was something that the Naguilwan Mattis had made her promise to keep to herself until the time was right, a trump card to be used only when there was no other way out. She added in a dramatic whisper that the Naguil had foreseen their new living arrangement, which was the result of my taking Josefina to Tula to be with Pabfido. She said that there was a faint chance that we might succeed as a group if we followed the natural order of that organization. La Gorda explained that since we were divided into couples, we formed a living organism. We were a snake, a rattlesnake. The snake had 4 sections and was divided into 2 longitudinal halves, male and female. She said that she and I made up the first section of the snake, the head. It was a cold, calculating, poisonous head. The second section, formed by Nestor and Lydia, was the firm and fair heart of the snake. The third was the belly, a shifty, moody, untrustworthy belly made up by Pablito and Josefina. And the fourth section, the tail, where the rattle was located, was formed by the couple who in real life could rattle on in their Tsotsa language for hours on end, Benigno and Rosa. La Gorda straightened herself up from the position she had adopted to whisper in my ear. She smiled at me and patted me on the back. Eligio said one word that finally came back to me, she went on. "Josefina agrees with me that he said the word trail over and over. We are going to go on a trail." Without giving me a chance to ask her any questions, she said that she was going to sleep for a while and then assemble everyone to go on a trip. We started out before midnight, hiking in bright moonlight. Every one of the others had been reluctant to go at first, but La Gorda very skillfully sketched out for them Don Juan's alleged description of the snake. Before we started, Lydia suggested that we provide ourselves with supplies in case the trip turned out to be a long one. La Gorda dismissed her suggestion on the grounds that we had no idea about the nature of the trip. She said that the Naguilwan Mattis had once pointed out to her the beginning of a pathway and said that at the right opportunity we should place ourselves on that spot and let the power of the trail reveal itself to us. La Gorda added that it was not an ordinary goat's path but a natural line on the earth which the Naguil had said would give us strength and knowledge if we could follow it and become one with it. We moved under mixed leadership. La Gorda supplied the impetus and Nestor knew the actual terrain. She led us to a place in the mountains. Nestor took over then and located a pathway. Our formation was evident, the head taking the lead and the others arranging themselves according to the anatomical model of a snake, heart, intestines, and tail. The men were to the right of the women. Each couple was 5 feet behind the one in front of them. We hiked as quickly and as quietly as we could. There were dogs barking for a time. As we got higher into the mountains there was only the sound of crickets. We walked for a long while. All of a sudden La Gorda stopped and grabbed my arm. She pointed ahead of us. 20 or 30 yards away, right in the middle of the trail, there was the bulky silhouette of an enormous man, over 7 feet tall. He was blocking our way. We grouped together in a tight bunch. Our eyes were fixed on the dark shape. He did not move. After a while, Nestor alone advanced a few steps toward him. Only then did the figure move. He came toward us. Gigantic as he was, he moved nimbly. Nestor came back running. The moment he joined us, the man stopped. Boldly, La Gorda took a step toward him. The man took a step toward us. It was evident that if we kept on moving forward, we were going to clash with the giant. We were no match for whatever it was. Without waiting to prove it, I took the initiative and pulled everyone back and quickly steered them away from that place. We walked back to LaGuardia's house in total silence. It took us hours to get there, we were utterly exhausted. When we were safely sitting in her room, LaGuardia spoke. "We are doomed," she said to me. "You didn't want us to move on. That thing we saw on the trail was one of your allies, wasn't it? They come out of their hiding place when you pull them out." I did not answer. There was no point in protesting. I remembered the countless times I had believed that Don Juan and Don Gennaro were in cahoots with each other. I thought that while Don Juan talked to me in the darkness, Don Gennaro would put on a disguise in order to scare me, and Don Juan would insist that it was an ally. The idea that there were allies or entities at large that escape our everyday attention had been too far-fetched for me. But then I had lived to find out that the allies of Don Juan's description existed. In fact, there were, as he had said, entities at large in the world. In an authoritarian outburst, rare to me in my everyday life, I stood up and told LaGuardia and the rest of them that I had a proposition for them and they could take it or leave it. If they were ready to move out of there, I was willing to take the responsibility of taking them somewhere else. If they were not ready, I would feel exonerated from any further commitment to them. I felt a surge of optimism and certainty. None of them said anything. They looked at me silently, as if they were internally assessing my statements. "How long would it take you to get your gear?" I asked. "We have no gear," LaGuardia said. "We'll go as we are. And we can go right this minute if it is necessary. But if we can wait 3 more days, everything will be better for us." "What about the houses that you have?" I asked. "Soledad will take care of that," she said. That was the first time Donna Soledad's name had been mentioned since I last saw her. I was so intrigued that I momentarily forgot the drama of the moment. I sat down. LaGuardia was hesitant to answer my questions about Donna Soledad. Nestor took over and said that Donna Soledad was around but that none of them knew much about her activities. She came and went without giving anyone notice, the agreement between them being that they would look after her house and vice versa. Donna Soledad knew that they had to leave sooner or later, and she would assume the responsibility of doing whatever was necessary to dispose of their property. "How will you let her know?" I asked. "That's LaGuardia's department," Nestor said. "We don't know where she is." "Where is Donna Soledad, Guardia?" I asked. "How in the hell would I know?" LaGuardia snapped at me. "But you're the one who calls her," Nestor said. LaGuardia looked at me. It was a casual look, yet it gave me a shiver. I recognized that look, but from where? The depths of my body stirred, my solar plexus had a solidity I had never felt before. My diaphragm seemed to be pushing up on its own. I was pondering whether I should lie down when suddenly I found myself standing. "LaGuardia doesn't know," I said. "Only I know where she is." Everyone was shocked, I perhaps more than anyone else. I had made the statement with no rational foundation whatsoever. At the moment I was voicing it, nevertheless, I had had the perfect conviction that I knew where she was. It was like a flash that crossed my consciousness. I saw a mountainous area with very rugged, arid peaks, a scraggy terrain, desolate and cold. As soon as I had spoken, my next conscious thought was that I must have seen that landscape in a movie and that the pressure of being with these people was causing me to have a breakdown. I apologized to them for mystifying them in such a blatant although unintentional manner. I sat down again. "You mean you don't know why you said that?" Nestor asked me. He had chosen his words carefully. The natural thing to say, at least for me, would have been, "So you really don't know where she is?" I told them that something unknown had come upon me. I described the terrain I had seen and the certainty I had had that Donna Soledad was there. "That happens to us quite often," Nestor said. I turned to LaGuardia and she nodded her head. I asked for an explanation. "These crazy mixed-up things keep coming to our minds," LaGuardia said. "Ask Lydia, or Rosa, or Josefina." Since they had entered into their new living arrangement, Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina had not said much to me. They had confined themselves to greetings and casual comments about food or the weather. Lydia avoided my eyes. She mumbled that she thought at times that she remembered other things. "Sometimes I can really hate you," she said to me. "I think you are pretending to be stupid. Then I remember that you were very ill because of us. Was it you?" "Of course it was him," Rosa said. "I too remember things. I remember a lady who was kind to me. She taught me how to keep myself clean, and this Nagwil cut my hair for the first time, while the lady held me, because I was scared. That lady loved me. She hugged me all the time. She was very tall. I remember my face was on her bosom when she used to hug me. She was the only person who ever cared for me. I would have gladly gone to my death for her." "Who was that lady, Rosa?" La Gorda asked with bated breath. Rosa pointed to me with a movement of her chin, a gesture heavy with dejection and contempt. "He knows," she said. All of them stared at me, waiting for an answer. I became angry and yelled at Rosa that she had no business making statements that were really accusations. I was not in any way lying to them. Rosa was not flustered by my outburst. She calmly explained that she remembered the lady telling her that I would come back someday, after I had recovered from my illness. Rosa understood that the lady was taking care of me, nursing me back to health, therefore, I had to know who she was and where she was, since I seemed to have recovered. "What kind of illness did I have, Rosa?" I asked. "You got ill because you couldn't hold your world," she said with utter conviction. "Someone told me, I think a very long time ago, that you were not made for us, just like Eligio told La Gorda in dreaming. You left us because of it and Lydia never forgave you. She'll hate you beyond this world." Lydia protested that her feelings for me had nothing to do with what Rosa was saying. She was merely short-tempered and easily got angry at my stupidities. I asked Josefina if she also remembered me. "I sure do," she said with a grin. "But you know me, I'm crazy. You can't trust me. I'm not dependable." La Gorda insisted on hearing what Josefina remembered. Josefina was set not to say anything and they argued back and forth. Finally Josefina spoke to me. "What's the use of all this talk about remembering? It's just talk," she said. "And it isn't worth a figure." Josefina seemed to have scored a point with all of us. There was no more to be said. They were getting up to leave after having sat in polite silence for a few minutes. "I remember you bought me beautiful clothes," Josefina suddenly said to me. "Don't you remember when I fell down the stairs in one store? I nearly broke my leg and you had to carry me out." Everybody sat down again and kept their eyes fixed on Josefina. "I also remember a crazy woman," she went on. "She wanted to beat me and used to chase me all over the place until you got angry and stopped her." I felt exasperated. Everyone seemed to be hanging on Josefina's words when she herself had told us not to trust her because she was crazy. She was right. Her remembering was sheer aberration to me. "I know why you got ill, too," she went on. "I was there. But I can't remember where. They took you beyond that wall of fog to find this stupid Gorda. I suppose she must have gotten lost. You couldn't make it back. When they brought you out you were almost dead." The silence that followed her revelations was oppressive. I was afraid to ask anything. "I can't remember why on earth she went in there, or who brought you back," Josefina continued. "I do remember that you were ill and didn't recognize me anymore. This stupid Gorda swears that she didn't know you when you first came to this house a few months ago. I knew you right away. I remembered you were the Nagwal that got ill. You want to know something? I think these women are just indulging. And so are the men, especially that stupid Pablito. They've got to remember, they were there, too." "Can you remember where we were?" I asked. "No. I can't," Josefina said. "I'll know it if you take me there, though. When we all were there, they used to call us the drunkards because we were groggy. I was the least dizzy of all, so I remember pretty well." "Who called us drunkards?" I asked. Not you, just us, Josephina replied. I don't know who. The Naguilwan Mattis, I suppose. I looked at them and each one of them avoided my eyes. We are coming to the end, Nestor muttered, as if talking to himself. Our ending is staring us in the eye. He seemed to be on the verge of tears. I should be glad and proud that we have arrived at the end, he went on. Yet I'm sad. Can you explain that, Naguel? Suddenly all of them were sad. Even defiant Lydia was sad. What's wrong with all of you? I asked in a convivial tone. What ending are you talking about? I think everyone knows what ending it is, Nestor said. Lately, I've been having strange feelings. Something is calling us. And we don't let go as we should. We cling. Pablito had a true moment of gallantry and said that La Gorda was the only one among them who did not cling to anything. The rest of them, he assured me, were nearly hopeless egotists. The Naguilwan Mattis said that when it's time to go we will have a sign, Nestor said. Something we truly like will come forth and take us. He said it doesn't have to be something great, Benigno added. Anything we like will do. For me the sign will come in the form of the lead soldiers I never had, Nestor said to me. A row of hussars on horseback will come to take me. What will it be for you? I remembered Don Juan telling me once that death might be behind anything imaginable, even behind a dot on my writing pad. He gave me then the definitive metaphor of my death. I had told him that once while walking on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles I had heard the sound of a trumpet playing an old, idiotic popular tune. The music was coming from a record shop across the street. Never had I heard a more beautiful sound. I became enraptured by it. I had to sit down on the curb. The limpid brass sound of that trumpet was going directly to my brain. I felt it just above my right temple. It soothed me until I was drunk with it. When it concluded, I knew that there would be no way of ever repeating that experience, and I had enough detachment not to rush into the store and buy the record and a stereo set to play it on. Don Juan said that it had been a sign given to me by the powers that rule the destiny of men. When the time comes for me to leave the world, in whatever form, I will hear the same sound of that trumpet, the same idiotic tune, the same peerless trumpeter. The next day was a frantic day for them. They seemed to have endless things to do. La Gorda said that all their chores were personal and had to be performed by each one of them without any help. I welcomed being alone. I too had things to work out. I drove to the nearby town that had disturbed me so thoroughly. I went directly to the house that had held such fascination for La Gorda and myself. I knocked on the door. A lady answered. I made out the story that I had lived in that house as a child and wanted to look at it again. She was a very gracious woman. She let me go through the house, apologizing profusely for a non-existent disorder. There was a wealth of hidden memories in that house. They were there, I could feel them, but I could not remember anything. The following day La Gorda left at dawn. I expected her to be gone all day but she came back at noon. She seemed very upset. Soledad has come back and wants to see you, she said flatly. Without any word of explanation, she took me to Donna Soledad's house. Donna Soledad was standing by the door. She looked younger and stronger than the last time I had seen her. She bore only the slightest resemblance to the lady I had known years before. La Gorda seemed to be on the verge of crying. The tension we were going through made her mood perfectly understandable to me. She left without saying a word. Donna Soledad said that she had only a little time to talk to me and that she was going to use every minute of it. She was strangely deferential. There was a tone of politeness in every word she said. I made a gesture to interrupt her to ask a question. I wanted to know where she had been. She rebuffed me in a most delicate manner. She said that she had chosen her words carefully and that the lack of time would permit her only to say what was essential. She peered into my eyes for a moment that seemed unnaturally long. That annoyed me. She could have talked to me and answered some questions in the same length of time. She broke her silence and spoke what I thought were absurdities. She said that she had attacked me as I had requested her to, the day we crossed the parallel lines for the first time, and that she only hoped her attack had been effective and served its purpose. I wanted to shout that I had never asked her to do anything of the sort. I did not know about parallel lines, and what she was saying was nonsense. She pressed my lips with her hand. I recoiled automatically. She seemed sad. She said that there was no way for us to talk because at that moment we were on two parallel lines and neither of us had the energy to cross over, only her eyes could tell me her mood. For no reason, I began to feel relaxed, something inside me felt at ease. I noticed that tears were rolling down my cheeks. And then a most incredible sensation took possession of me for a moment, a short moment but long enough to jolt the foundations of my consciousness, or of my person, or of what I think and feel is myself. During that brief moment I knew that we were very close to each other in purpose and temperament. Our circumstances were alike. I wanted to acknowledge to her that it had been an arduous struggle, but the struggle was not over yet. It would never be over. She was saying goodbye because, being the impeccable warrior she was, she knew that our paths would never cross again. We had come to the end of a trail. A lost wave of affiliation, of kinship, burst out from some unimaginable dark corner of myself. That flash was like an electric charge in my body. I embraced her, my mouth was moving, saying things that had no meaning to me. Her eyes lit up. She was also saying something I could not understand. The only sensation that was clear to me, that I had crossed the parallel lines, had no pragmatic significance. There was a welled-up anguish inside me pushing outward. Some inexplicable force was splitting me apart. I could not breathe and everything went black. I felt someone moving me, shaking me gently. La Gorda's face came into focus. I was lying in Donna Soledad's bed and La Gorda was sitting by my side. We were alone. "Where is she?" I asked. "She's gone," La Gorda replied. I wanted to tell La Gorda everything. She stopped me. She opened the door. All the apprentices were outside waiting for me. They had put on their raunchiest clothes. La Gorda explained that they had torn up everything they had. It was late afternoon. I had been asleep for hours. Without talking, we walked to La Gorda's house, where I had my car parked. They crammed inside like children going on a Sunday drive. Before I got into the car I stood gazing at the valley. My body rotated slowly and made a complete circle, as if it had a volition and purpose of its own. I felt I was capturing the essence of that place. I wanted to keep it with me because I knew unequivocally that never in this life would I see it again. The others must have done that already. They were free of melancholy, they were laughing, teasing one another. I started the car and drove away. When we reached the last bend in the road the sun was setting, and La Gorda yelled at me to stop. She got out and ran to a small hill at the side of the road. She climbed it and took a last look at her valley. She extended her arms toward it and breathed it in. The ride down those mountains was strangely short and thoroughly uneventful. Everybody was quiet. I tried to get La Gorda into a conversation, but she flatly refused. She said that the mountains, being possessive, claimed ownership of them, and that if they did not save their energy, the mountains would never let them go. Once we got to the lowlands they became more animated, especially La Gorda. She seemed to be bubbling with energy. She even volunteered information without any coaxing on my part. One of her statements was that the Naguilwan Matis had told her, and Soledad had confirmed, that there was another side to us. Upon hearing it, the rest of them joined in with questions and comments. They were baffled by their strange memories of events that could not logically have taken place. Since some of them had first met me only months before, remembering me in the remote past was something beyond the bounds of their reason. I told them then about my meeting with Donna Soledad. I described my feeling of having known her intimately before, and my sense of having unmistakably crossed what she called the parallel lines. They reacted with confusion to my statement. It seemed that they had heard the term before, but I was not sure they all understood what it meant. For me it was a metaphor. I could not vouch that it was the same for them. When we were coming into the city of Oaxaca, they expressed the desire to visit the place where La Gorda had said Don Juan and Don Gennaro disappeared. I drove directly to the spot. They rushed out of the car and seemed to be orienting themselves, sniffing at something, looking for clues. La Gorda pointed in the direction she thought they had gone. "You've made a terrible mistake, Gorda," Nestor said loudly. "That's not the east, that's the north." La Gorda protested and defended her opinion. The women backed her, and so did Pablito. Benigno was non-committal. He kept on looking at me as if I were going to furnish the answer, which I did. I referred to a map of the city of Oaxaca that I had in the car. The direction La Gorda was pointing was indeed north. Nestor remarked that he had felt all along that their departure from their town was not premature or forced in any way, the timing was right. The others had not, and their hesitation arose from La Gorda's misjudgment. They had believed, as she herself had, that the Nagual had pointed toward their hometown, meaning that they had to stay put. I admitted, as an afterthought, that in the final analysis I was the one to blame because, although I had had the map, I had failed to use it at the time. I then mentioned that I had forgotten to tell them that one of the men, the one I had thought for a moment was Don Gennaro, had beckoned us with a movement of his head. La Gorda's eyes widened with genuine surprise, or even alarm. She had not detected the gesture, she said. The beckoning had been only for me. "That's it!" Nestor exclaimed. "Our fates are sealed." He turned to address the others. All of them were talking at once. He made frantic gestures with his hands to calm them. "I only hope that all of you did whatever you had to do as if you were never coming back," he said. "Because we are never going back." "Are you telling us the truth?" Lydia asked me with a fierce look in her eyes, as the others peered expectantly at me. I assured them that I had no reason to make it up. The fact that I saw that man gesturing to me with his head had no significance whatsoever for me. Besides, I was not even convinced that those men were Don Juan and Don Gennaro. "You're very crafty," Lydia said. "You may just be telling us this so that we will follow you meekly." "Now, wait a minute," La Gorda said. "This Nagual may be as crafty as you like, but he'd never do anything like that." They all began talking at once. I tried to mediate and had to shout over their voices that what I had seen did not make any difference anyway. Nestor very politely explained that Gennaro had told them that when the time came for them to leave their valley he would somehow let them know with a movement of his head. They quieted down when I said that if their fates were sealed by that event, so was mine, all of us were going north. Nestor then led us to a place of lodging, a boarding house where he stayed when doing business in the city. Their spirits were high, in fact too high for my comfort. Even Lydia embraced me, apologizing for being so difficult. She explained that she had believed La Gorda and therefore had not bothered to cut her ties effectively. Josefina and Rosa were ebullient and patted me on the back over and over. I wanted to talk with La Gorda. I needed to discuss our course of action. But there was no way to be alone with her that night. Nestor, Pablito, and Benigno left in the early morning to do some errands. Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina also went out to go shopping. La Gorda requested that I help her buy her new clothes. She wanted me to pick out one dress for her, the perfect one to give her the self-confidence she needed to be a fluid warrior. I not only found a dress but an entire outfit, shoes, nylons, and lingerie. I took her for a stroll. We meandered in the center of town like two tourists, staring at the Indians in their regional garments. Being a formless warrior, she was already perfectly at ease in her elegant outfit. She looked ravishing. It was as if she had never dressed any other way. It was I who could not get used to it. The questions that I wanted to ask La Gorda, which should have poured out of me, were impossible to formulate. I had no idea what to ask her. I told her in true seriousness that her new appearance was affecting me. Very soberly, she said that the crossing of boundaries was what had affected me. "We crossed some boundaries last night," she said. Soledad told me what to expect, so I was prepared. But you were not. She began to explain softly and slowly that we had crossed some boundaries of affection the night before. She was enunciating every syllable as if she were talking to a child or a foreigner. But I could not concentrate. We went back to our lodgings. I needed to rest, yet I ended up going out again. Lydia, Rosa, and Josefina had not been able to find anything and wanted something like La Guarda's outfit. By mid-afternoon I was back in the boarding house admiring the little sisters. Rosa had difficulty walking with high-heeled shoes. We were joking about her feet when the door opened slowly and Nestor made a dramatic entrance. He was wearing a tailored dark blue suit, light pink shirt, and blue necktie. His hair was neatly combed and a bit fluffy, as if it had been blown dry. He looked at the women and the women looked at him. Pablito came in, followed by Benigno. Both were dashing. Their shoes were brand new and their suits looked custom-made. I could not get over everyone's adaptation to city clothes. They reminded me so much of Don Juan. I was perhaps as shocked seeing the three generals in city clothes as I had been when I saw Don Juan wearing a suit, yet I accepted their change instantly. On the other hand, while I was not surprised at the women's transformation, for some reason I could not get accustomed to it. I thought that the Genros must have had a streak of sorcerer's luck in order to find such perfect fits. They laughed when they heard me raving about their luck. Nestor said that a tailor had made their suits months before. "We each have another suit," he said to me. "We even have leather suitcases. We knew our time in these mountains was up. We are ready to go. Of course, you first have to tell us where. And also how long we are going to stay here." He explained that he had old business accounts he had to close and needed time. La Guarda stepped in and with great certainty and authority stated that that night we were going to go as far away as power permitted, consequently they had until the end of the day to settle their business. Nestor and Pablito hesitated by the door. They looked at me, waiting for confirmation. I thought the least I could do was to be honest with them, but La Guarda interrupted me just as I was about to say that I was in limbo as to what exactly we were going to do. "We will meet at the Nagual's bench at dusk," she said. "We'll leave from there. We should do whatever we have to or want to, until then, knowing that never again in this life will we be back." La Guarda and I were alone after everybody left. In an abrupt and clumsy movement, she sat on my lap. She was so light, I could make her thin body shake by contracting the muscles of my calves. Her hair had a peculiar perfume. I joked that the smell was unbearable. She was laughing and shaking when out of nowhere a feeling came to me, a memory. All of a sudden I had another Guarda on my lap, fat, twice the size of the Guarda I knew. Her face was round and I was teasing her about the perfume in her hair. I had the sensation that I was taking care of her. The impact of that spurious memory made me stand up. La Guarda fell noisily to the floor. I described what I had remembered. I told her that I had seen her as a fat woman only once, and so briefly that I had no idea of her features, and yet I had just had a vision of her face when she was fat. She did not make any comments. She took off her clothes and put on her old dress again. "I am not yet ready for it," she said, pointing at her new outfit. "We still have one more thing to do before we are free." According to the Nagual Juan Matus instructions, all of us must sit together on a power spot of his choice. "Where's that spot?" "Somewhere in the mountains around here. It's like a door." The Nagual told me that there was a natural crack on that spot. He said that certain power spots are holes in this world. If you are formless, you can go through one of those holes into the unknown, into another world. That world and this world we live in are on two parallel lines. Chances are that all of us have been taken across those lines at one time or another, but we don't remember. Eligio is in that other world. Sometimes we reach it through dreaming. Josefina, of course, is the best dreamer among us. She crosses those lines every day, but being crazy makes her indifferent, even dumb, So Adligio helped me to cross those lines thinking I was more intelligent, and I turned out to be just as dumb. Adligio wants us to remember our left side. Soledad told me that the left side is the parallel line to the one we are living in now. So if he wants us to remember it, we must have been there. And not in dreaming, either. That's why all of us remember weird things now and then. Her conclusions were logical given the premises she was working with. I knew what she was talking about. Those occasional unsolicited memories reeked of the reality of everyday life, and yet we could find no time sequence for them, no opening in the continuum of our lives where we could fit them. La Gorda reclined on the bed. There was a worried look in her eyes. "What bothers me is what to do to find that power spot," she said. "Without it there is no possible journey for us. What worries me is where I'm going to take all of you and what I'm going to do with you," I said. "Soledad told me that we will go as far north as the border," La Gorda said. "Some of us even further north perhaps. But you won't go all the way through with us. You have another fate." La Gorda was pensive for a moment. She frowned with the apparent effort of arranging her thoughts. "Soledad said that you will take me to fulfill my destiny," La Gorda said. "I am the only one of us who is in your charge." Alarm must have been written all over my face. She smiled. "Soledad also told me that you are plugged up," La Gorda went on. "You have moments, though, when you are an Aguil. The rest of the time, Soledad says, you are like a crazy man who is lucid only for a few moments and then reverts back to his madness." Donna Soledad had used an appropriate image to describe me, one I could understand. I must have had a moment of lucidity for her when I knew I had crossed the parallel lines. That same moment, by my standards, was the most incongruous of all. Donna Soledad and I were certainly on two different lines of thought. "What else did she tell you?" I asked. "She told me I should force myself to remember," La Gorda said. "She exhausted herself trying to bring out my memory, that was why she couldn't deal with you." La Gorda got up, she was ready to leave. I took her for a walk around the city. She seemed very happy. She went from place to place watching everything, feasting her eyes on the world. Don Juan had given me that image. He had said that a warrior knows that he is waiting and knows also what he is waiting for, and while he waits he feasts his eyes on the world. For him the ultimate accomplishment of a warrior was joy. That day in Oaxaca La Gorda was following Don Juan's teachings to the letter. In the late afternoon, before dusk, we sat down on Don Juan's bench. Benigno, Pablito, and Josefina showed up first. After a few minutes the other three joined us. Pablito sat down between Josefina and Lydia and put his arms around them. They had changed back into their old clothes. La Gorda stood up and began to tell them about the power spot. Nestor laughed at her and the rest of them joined him. "Never again will you get us to fall for your bossiness," Nestor said. "We are free of you. We crossed the boundaries last night." La Gorda was unruffled but the others were angry. I had to intervene. I said loudly that I wanted to know more about the boundaries we had crossed the night before. Nestor explained that that pertained only to them. La Gorda disagreed. They seemed to be on the verge of fighting. I pulled Nestor to the side and ordered him to tell me about the boundaries. "Our feelings make boundaries around anything," he said. "The more we love, the stronger the boundary is. In this case we loved our home. Before we left it we had to lift up our feelings. Our feelings for our home went up to the top of the mountains to the west from our valley. That was the boundary, and when we crossed the top of those mountains, knowing that we'll never be back, we broke it." "But I also knew that I'd never be back," I said. "You didn't love those mountains the way we did," Nestor replied. "That remains to be seen," La Gorda said cryptically. "We were under her influence," Pablito said, standing up and pointing to La Gorda. "She had us by the napes of our necks. Now I see how stupid we've been on account of her. We can't cry over spilled milk, but we'll never fall for it again." Lydia and Josefina joined Nestor and Pablito. Benigno and Rosa looked on as if the struggle did not concern them anymore. I had right then another moment of certainty and authoritarian behavior. I stood up and, without any conscious volition, announced that I was taking charge and that I relieved La Gorda of any further obligation to make comments or to present her ideas as the only solution. When I finished talking, I was shocked at my boldness. Everyone, including La Gorda, was delighted. The force behind my explosion had been first a physical sensation that my sinuses were opening, and second the certainty that I knew what Don Juan had meant, and exactly where the place was that we had to visit before we could be free. As my sinuses opened, I had had a vision of the house that had intrigued me. I told them where we had to go. They accepted my directions without any arguments or even comments. We checked out of the boarding house and went to eat dinner. Afterward we strolled around the plaza until about 11 o'clock. I brought the car around, they piled noisily inside, and we were off. La Gorda remained awake to keep me company while the rest of them went to sleep, and then Nestor drove while La Gorda and I slept.